Hello, welcome back to my channel and to today's video where I'm going to be doing a COS try on. However, I'm doing this one slightly differently to how I normally do them, and I'm just focusing on the two categories that I think at this time of year in particular are worth the investment when you're shopping at COS. And those two categories are knitwear and outerwear. Right, so let's get started with knitwear first, and then I'm going to move on to outerwear. So my first piece of knitwear is my favourite. I am not saving the best to last. I am going with the best first and foremost. And it might look familiar because I have one of these on. This is from a previous season, but COS have been bringing these chunky cashmere funnel neck jumpers out for I think about 3 or 4 years now, and hands up, I'm not ashamed to admit that I have a bit of a collection of these. So this season they've got a couple of new colours, this beautiful burgundy, which I have decided to keep and add to my wardrobe because this would, regardless of doing a COS try on or not, this would have been something that I would definitely have purchased for my wardrobe just because of past experience with these jumpers. I love them. They are so thick. When it comes to high street cashmere, COS for me is the #1 brand that I would recommend because I think it's excellent value for money. It is excellent quality. It is so soft and it lasts. So when it comes to the style of this particular knit, it's a funnel neck and it is quite oversized with rather voluminous sleeves, and they are a dropped sleeve as well. So one thing that I would just mention where you kind of have to be a bit cautious is when it comes to combining this knit with outerwear. You couldn't just wear a standard coat with slightly tighter fitting sleeves with something like this, A, because of the thickness, and B, because of the volume and the shape and placement of the sleeves. So with a jumper like this, you really need more of like a cocoon coat, something that has a bit more volume in the sleeves and something that also has a drop sleeve, because as you can see on me here, actually wearing the jumper, it's almost like a bat wing. So you don't want all of that bunching up. You need a coat which is going to have a little bit of space underneath. So just something to bear in mind if looking at investing in one of these in particular. Right, next up we've got brushed cashmere. And I've seen a bit of a rise of brushed cashmere this season. M&S have got a couple of crew neck jumpers in some really beautiful colours actually. So for anyone that's interested, I will also link those down below in the description box. And I suppose at some point I could get around to doing a brushed cashmere edit, finding all of the brushed cashmere that's available out there and collating it all in one place. So just give me a hot minute and I'll try and get one of those together. So this is one of the pieces from COS's brushed cashmere collection, and they do actually have quite a vast range. When I typed in just brushed cashmere into their search bar, it came up with this, which is the crew neck, which is oversized. They've also got a sleeveless button-up, they call it a waistcoat, but some people may call it a vest or sleeveless cardigan. Then they have a cardigan, they've got a polo jumper, and then also a plethora of accessories from beanies, scarves, triangle scarves, shawls, all that kind of thing. So they've gone all in on the brushed cashmere this season. So when it comes to comparisons between this and the chunkier cashmere, for example, this is much thinner. So this has a similar thickness to their sort of very basic cashmere, so just the basic crew necks, because those are considerably thinner than these chunkier styles. Not necessarily a bad thing because it does provide, you know, a good layering piece. So you can layer these over a basic t-shirt, or as the weather gets much cooler, perhaps a piece of like Uniqlo heat tech, a thermal of some kind. And they are good pieces for layering. And also because of that lack of chunkiness to it, it does make it a much better option for wearing under a wider variety of coats, because you haven't got that bulk in there. And also this is just a basic crew neck. Although it's oversized, you don't have drop sleeves or any of those kind of features that make it tricky under certain coats. So whilst the thickness isn't quite the same as the chunkier styles, there is no compromise whatsoever on the softness. In fact, I think this feels a touch softer than the thicker styles and all the other COS cashmere as well, and that is because it is brushed. Now, I know there's going to be lots of you in particular looking at the close-ups of this jumper and seeing the fluffy nature and the fluffy texture of it and wondering, does it molt? The unfortunate answer to that question is yes. Now, from my experience with various different forms of knitwear, it does not molt, and obviously this is not something that is a part of my wardrobe. I haven't had any experience wearing it because I have ordered this in order to do this try on, but I do have lots of experience with mohair. And mohair, also alpaca, are demons for molting. They are pretty bad when it comes to the molt scale. This is not as bad, but obviously something to bear in mind is colour combinations. So if you're wearing something that perhaps is lighter on the top, if the brushed cashmere is lighter and then you're wearing a black trouser or a black coat over the top, those fibres that are fluffing off are going to be more visible. So that's just something that I would think about when investing in a piece of the brushed cashmere. But by no means do I feel that it is molting to a crazy degree. Enough to put me off. It is something that I would buy. I just already have a grey crew neck that is cashmere, so I don't feel that I need this one. Right, moving on to my next piece of knitwear, and we've got a cardigan now. So this is actually a wool and cashmere blend. It's 70% wool and 30% recycled cashmere. Now, the wool, in a similar way to a lot of the cashmere that COS use, is responsible wool standard wool. So you will see this marked on various different websites, anyone that uses or that has been granted this certification, and it will be displayed as RWS, responsible wool standard. So in terms of the feel of the fabric, it's thick. So it has the thickness of the first jumper that I shared. It doesn't feel quite as soft, and that's fair enough because it's only got 30% recycled cashmere in here rather than the 100% good cashmere standard cashmere that's used in the first jumper. That said, it doesn't feel, for something that's got the majority of wool content in here, it doesn't feel itchy or scratchy. Now, it is worth bearing in mind that I do not have any intolerance to natural fibres, so wool, cashmere, mohair, I can wear any of those things without feeling irritated, but I can feel a product and I can feel when I think it would be irritable for someone else. Of course, if you do actually have a skin intolerance, then wool will be completely off the menu for you. But if you just have more of like a skin irritation, maybe you're a bit sensory and you can feel things, this definitely does not feel itchy or scratchy. It feels very, very soft. And it's a nice, thick, substantial cardigan. Perfect for this time of year, perfect for autumn for layering, perfect for winter when it comes to layering over, perhaps if you're going to swap out a t-shirt or a basic of some kind and layer it over a thermal and then maybe another piece of knitwear. It's a really good piece for using as part of layering outfits. Now, a lot of the points when it comes to style and shape and sleeves apply to this in the same way that they do to the first jumper I shared. So this is thick. You have to bear that in mind when you're thinking about your outerwear. If your outerwear fits quite snugly over perhaps just a thinner piece of cashmere or over a t-shirt or something like that, sleeves wise in particular, you're definitely going to have little sausage arms. You're not going to be able to feel comfortable or have any movement, which is why I often upsize in a lot of my coats, just by one size, in particular if it's not an oversized fit. That way I get that freedom of movement when I'm going to go on to moving on to my thicker knits. Right, on to my next, which is actually a very similar style. Let's get it up to compare to the first one. So 100% cashmere, and this is essentially the 100% wool equivalent, which is considerably less in price. So this comes up at £95. So it's probably going to be a more affordable price point for a piece of like long-term investment knitwear than the 250 something pounds of the 100% cashmere. And like I said, for me, they're worth the money, but obviously you have to stay within your own budget. So first and foremost, it doesn't feel as soft, but I think that's a given. Anything that has cashmere in it is going to feel much softer, even if it's like a 30% blend. However, it doesn't feel itchy. And again, I have no intolerance, but for me personally, it doesn't have that real coarseness that wool can sometimes have. It does have a softness to it. Now, thickness-wise, it also doesn't feel quite as thick as either the cardigan or the 100% cashmere, but it's only a smidge off. It's not far off. It still has that cozy, sort of cuddly, thick jumper vibe to it. And again, because it is a very similar style with the drop sleeves and a thicker fabric, you do need to bear in mind when you're choosing your outerwear with this piece. Right, next. This one's slightly different, and I wanted to feature this just because I know there'll be a lot of people. COS has a very loyal customer base. And I think it's very popular because they have a very sort of sophisticated style and element. And whilst I'm quite a casual dresser, I add my elements of tailoring in to smarten myself up from time to time, but I don't have a workwear wardrobe. But I think COS is quite popular for those people that do require a workwear wardrobe. And whilst this isn't limited to workwear, I think it would be a really nice option as a piece of workwear for this time of year. So this is the draped merino wool V-neck. Again, responsible wool standard wool, 100% merino wool, which feels very different to just wool, to normal wool. So it's more compact in the way that it's made, and it's a thermoregulator, which technically so is wool and so is cashmere, but there's something about merino wool. It's one of those fibres or fabrics that you can wear in summer, but also in winter. It's, I was going to say designed, it's a natural fibre, but in its design, it is supposed to keep you cool in summer and warm in winter because it adapts to your body temperature. And when it comes to thickness, it's a good way to keep warm, but without having a really chunky layer, because as I said, it is a lot more compact and it is a much thinner fabric. So this would be a good piece that you could layer underneath a blazer, and then as it gets cooler still, you could add another piece of outerwear, your chunky winter wool coat over the top of that as well. Now, this is a really good example of what COS does very well. On the surface, it's a very minimal piece, but it's just the way that it's been cut. It has a very sort of minimalist designer, like old Celine vibe about it. And I think this is one reason why COS has such a cult following, because for other people like myself who have a bit of old Celine fandom, this is something which just embodies that kind of style, but doesn't quite have that super luxury and designer price tag, because it is still high street. It's premium high street, but it is still high street. Okay, so that is knitwear done, and I know that I don't have loads of items to show you, but obviously we're still relatively early in the season, so I've kind of tried to pick different things from in my head, different categories, so that I can share those with you guys. And it is just to give you a rough idea of the kind of pieces that COS has to offer at the moment, and the pieces which I think are definitely worth the money. So now I'm going to move on to outerwear, and I've got 3 coats or 3 pieces of outerwear to share with you guys. I've got one lined style, one unlined double-faced style, and then another double-faced unlined but jacket. So I've tried to cover the bases that, you know, you kind of get in most coats these days. So let's start off with coat number 1. And this is the lined style. So this is really heavy. This is the oversized double-breasted coat. It comes in this very beautiful seasonal, I don't know what kind of green, forest green, shall we call it. and it also comes in black. Okay, fabric composition, 74% recycled wool and 26% polyamide. And as I mentioned, it is a fully lined style. The lining is 100% viscose. So no polyester in sight, but there is that 26% polyamide, which I know many of you will question. Now this isn't something which is rare, even in designer coats. A lot of designer coats will have some sort of polyamide or even polyester in there, especially when blended with things like wool, not so often cashmere, but in particular with wool. And there is a benefit to that. So first of all, it makes the fabric more durable. Whilst wool is, a pretty robust fibre, adding that touch of polyamide in there is just going to give it extra longevity. Because when we're looking at the price points of some of these pieces, it's all relative depending on the person, but they are investment pieces. You're going to want them in your wardrobe for a substantial length of time. You're going to want them to last. So they've added that polyamide in there just to give them a bit more durability. Polyamide also helps fibres maintain their shape, or the overall fabric maintain its shape, which is something that you want in a piece of outerwear when it has a very specific shape to it, and when things are tailored, you want them to have that shape. Now let's move on to style. So this is an oversized style. It is not a petite friendly coat, I'm afraid to say. So it does have that it feels like one of them coats you could really bundle up in when it comes to winter, and you can get snugly in it. It feels thick, feels cozy, very, very substantial. You've also got the lapel, which buttons right up, which gives you that, you don't necessarily have to wear a scarf. It gives you that protection against any wind chill around your neck, which it can certainly get very chilly in the winter seasons. So it is a decent coat that can definitely see you through, depending on where you live in the world. If you're in the UK, like for when I used to live in London or living where I am here, this is a coat that would see me through the winter season as well. Okay, now we're moving on to my personal favourite. And when I do these try-ons, obviously I have to buy a range of different pieces to share with you guys. And for the most part, depending on the brand, it's quite easy to take that stuff back, whatever. This, when I do a COS try-on, it's very, very difficult. I get incredibly tempted to keep many items. And this is one that I have already bought a burgundy coat, which I really love, but this, it's getting me. It's getting me right here. It is definitely piquing my interest. So this is the double-faced full-length coat. And again, it's very weighty, so I'm going to just have to drape it. Now this is more of like what I call a robe style. I think it's probably quite commonly known as a robe style. So double-breasted, and it's one of those that you kind of wrap like a dressing gown or a bathrobe. And then it has the belt in the middle where you can just define the waist a little bit more. And this particular style of coat is usually always going to be made from a double-faced fabric. Now, I've referenced this before in previous videos, but for anyone that's maybe new here or can't remember or just doesn't know what double-faced is, if you see that term, it basically means that there are two pieces of wool fabric which have been bonded together to create one piece of fabric. And that one piece of fabric then has two outer sides to it because there's been two pieces of fabric bonded together. So it gives it a more premium and a more luxury finish, but then it doesn't require any lining because the wool is the same on the inside as it is on the outside. And this for me has always been a style of coat, something double-faced without lining, that I have very much preferred. I have several double-faced coats in my wardrobe and I love them. There's just something about them. And I know it won't be for everyone. There's lots of people who've said you don't like the feeling of when you wear it over the top of knitwear, you feel like it bubbles your knitwear perhaps a little bit more. I disagree with that, but each to their own. I just love the hang, the drape, the movement. They don't feel as stiff, they don't feel as structured. It's still wool, it's still got a warmth element to it. It's still going to keep you nice and cozy and warm. perhaps, depending on where you live in the world, again, maybe not all the way through the winter seasons, but there's just something about them, the way they move, they're just beautiful. Okay, on to the final coat, or this one is a jacket. So this again is another double-faced style. So the fabric composition is the same. It's that 60% responsible wool standard wool, 40% Tencel lyocell. So fabric exactly the same. It's the double face, so it's those two pieces of fabric bonded together, feels very compressed, and it's a very minimal jacket, but it has an integrated scarf. Now, the one thing to mention is that this scarf is not detachable. It's almost like an elongated part of the collar, which then forms this like lapel, if you will. And you can do multiple things with this scarf. You can do a one shoulder drape, you can do a two shoulder drape, you could leave it just to drape at the front, you could tie it at the front and fully tie it, almost like a little neckerchief. You could even just cross it at the front and accessorise with a little brooch if that is your kind of thing. So there are different styling options when it comes to a scarf coat or a scarf jacket. And scarf coats and jackets have been around for a good few years now, and they do not appear to be going away. I think they're actually quite a functional piece, especially if you're someone that maybe doesn't have a lot of space in your bag for an additional scarf, or if you're someone that misplaces things, then this is attached, so you're never going to lose your scarf. Now, the main part of the jacket itself is quite minimal, single-breasted with a button-up style. It looks nice left open, also looks nice done up. There's no actual collar, so aside from where you've got the scarf drape at the top, if you can see here, it then kind of just comes to an abrupt end. So there is no sort of collar shape around that area, but I quite like that. I think it is very, very in tune with kind of COS aesthetic. And I think the COS customer would probably appreciate that as well. And it's a good length, not too short, not too long. And this again is one thing that COS does really well, and it's this double-faced jacket. No bells and whistles, very classic, something you can whip out autumn-winter season after autumn-winter season. I bought one last year. I think I might have featured it in a video already this year, in a styling video. It was black, had a little collar, button-up. They haven't brought it out again in black this year, unless it's something still to be added to their collection, but it sold out twice last year. And that is one final note that I will mention when it comes to COS. COS outerwear in particular, they seem to have a little bit more stock of the knitwear, but COS outerwear sells out incredibly quickly. They don't have thousands of stores around the UK like some brands like Zara, and so therefore their stock is much more limited. And because they do have a bit of a cult following, and they don't actually bring out that many styles each season either. It's quite a curated collection that they normally bring out. So it is one of those cases where if you see something, you can't really procrastinate over it for too long. Otherwise, the chances are it will have gone. So I've come to the end of my rail, so that is it from me for this week. If you have a favourite piece, or perhaps if you've bought a piece of COS knitwear, it doesn't have to be my preferred cashmere, but if you've bought a piece of COS knitwear or COS outerwear and it's lasted you X amount of years, do let me know down in the comments section below. But for now, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.